Let's begin with something fundamental, something we often overlook because it's too close, too embedded in the fabric of our being, the role of sex in shaping human behavior and evolution. Now, when I say sex, I'm not speaking only of the act itself, but of the psychological energy behind it, what Freud called the libido, and what Jung more expansively understood as a core psychic force that moves us toward wholeness. From a biological standpoint, sex is the very mechanism through which life continues. But to stop there would be to miss the greater truthing. Sex doesn't just preserve life, it defines it. Consider this: every one of us is here because two people driven by desire, conscious or unconscious, came together. That's the beginning. But the real story unfolds in how that primal urge becomes the scaffolding for nearly everything we do. Our yearning to connect, to be seen, to matter, that's all rooted in this same energy. It's why we strive for success, not just to achieve, but to become desirable. It's why we build, compete, perform. Behind many of our most noble and ignoble pursuits lies a single force: the need to be chosen, to reproduce not only biologically, but symbolically, to leave something of ourselves behind. Sex, then, is not a distraction from the higher aims of humanity. It is the energy that animates them. Look closely, and you'll see it in art, architecture, even war. The construction of empires, the writing of poems, the quest for status or transcendence, all of these are in part manifestations of the sexual archetype. It is eros, not only as erotic love, but as the life instinct, the impulse to move toward union, creation, and ultimately meaning. And yet, what makes this more than instinct is our consciousness of it. We are not simply driven. We interpret, we project, we sublimate. Sexual energy in the human psyche is seldom direct. It takes form as ambition, charisma, spiritual longing, even aggression. Jung would argue that the sexual impulse becomes dangerous only when it is unconscious, when it operates in the shadows of the mind, unnoticed and unmetabolized, but when brought into the light, understood, not shamed, it becomes one of the most powerful tools for psychological integration and transformation. This is why sex is the key to everything. Because beneath our goals, our anxieties, our politics and our passions lies the same existential hunger to merge, to transcend separation, to become whole. When we acknowledge that, when we see sex not just as an act but as a language of the soul, we begin to understand ourselves with greater honesty and compassion. And so I leave you with this: sex isn't something to be managed, it's something to be understood. And in that understanding, we don't diminish its power. We liberate it. If we accept that sex is not merely a biological imperative, but a fundamental psychic force, then it follows naturally that its influence reaches far beyond the bedroom. In fact, one of the clearest indicators of this is how deeply sex saturates our culture. Art, music, literature, fashion. These are not trivial expressions. They are the outer symbols of inner psychic realities, and sex has always stood at the center of them. Why do we adorn the body? Why do we write love songs, paint nudes, build monuments that speak of power, beauty, longing? It's not because we are shallow or vain, but because we are trying to translate something invisible into form. Sexual energy, when it's not repressed, seeks expression, and culture becomes the medium through which the individual and the collective psyche give it shape. Michelangelo's David, the poetry of Rumi, the curves of a sports car, these are not just aesthetic achievements. They are vessels for desire, identity, and often the unconscious longing to unite the opposites within ourselves. Jung understood that symbols are the language of the unconscious. So when we see sexuality embedded in culture, we are not witnessing indulgence. We are witnessing the psyche in motion, trying to reconcile instinct with meaning. Sexuality, when viewed psychologically, is creative energy. It doesn't just make babies. It makes stories, rituals, civilizations. To ignore this is to flatten culture into entertainment. But to recognize the erotic dimension of culture is to awaken to its deeper purposing, to reflect, provoke, and evolve our understanding of what it means to be human. So here's the invitation: don't just consume culture. Listen to what it's telling you about your own desires, because what we create out there often reveals what we most seek in here. Now, if we follow this current further, this erotic energy flowing beneath our actions and embedded in our culture, we arrive at a truth that modern psychology is only beginning to articulate fully. Sexual energy is not just something we experience, it's something we can work with. It's a power source. When directed consciously, it becomes creative force, will, charisma, even spiritual fuel. The ancients understood this. In alchemy, in tantra, in mystical traditions across cultures, there is the recognition that the sexual impulse can be transmuted, sublimated, not repressed, but refined into something greater. Jung saw this process not as denial but transformation. The libido, when lifted out of its purely physical expression, becomes a force of individuation. That is, it drives us towards psychological integration and holiness. Think of the artist who channels longing into a masterpiece, or the leader whose magnetic presence inspires without coursing. What they are tapping into is not separate from sexuality. It is sexuality in its higher form, directed, awake, meaningful. And this isn't about suppression or celibacy. It's about awareness. It's about taking responsibility for the energy within us, recognizing that our erotic nature is not shameful, but sacred when integrated consciously. When we remain unconscious of this force, it often erupts in compulsive behaviors, fractured relationships, or inner confusion. But when we learn to contain it, not by shrinking it, but by giving it purpose, it fuels vision, vitality, and a deep sense of inner authority. So ask yourself, honestly, where is your sexual energy going? Is it being scattered, suppressed, or is it being shaped into something that reflects your highest self? Because once you realize you're not just a vessel of desire, but the architect of its direction, you no longer serve your impulses, they begin to serve you. And yet, despite the power and potential of sexual energy, much of the modern world treats it with fear, silence, or superficiality. We either suppress it in the name of morality or exploit it in the name of profit. But in both cases, we fail to understand it. And what we fail to understand, we distort. Repression doesn't eliminate sexual energy. It pushes it underground, into the shadow. Jung taught that whatever we exile from consciousness doesn't disappear, it becomes autonomous, influencing our lives from behind the scenes. This is why unexamined sexuality often emerges in the form of addiction, secrecy, or projection. What is denied becomes dangerous, not because it is inherently destructive, but because it is disconnected from awareness. On the other hand, reducing sex to a commodity, mere performance, consumption, or identity, strips it of its depth. We lose its symbolic value, its capacity to guide us toward deeper intimacy, transformation, and truth. A culture obsessed with sex and simultaneously ashamed of it is a culture in conflict with itself. And so are the individuals within it. The psychological cost is profound. Many of our relational wounds, our confusions about love, power, and self-worth, can be traced back to a lack of honest, conscious engagement with our own erotic nature. Education fails us when it speaks only of biology and risk. What's needed is a language of the soul, one that honors the complexity, the mystery, and the sacredness of sex. Until we face our sexuality, not as a problem to solve, but as a truth to integrate. We will continue to live divided from ourselves, because it is not repression or indulgence that leads to wholeness. It is understanding. And only through understanding do we gain the freedom to love. Not compulsively, not fearfully, but consciously. At the heart of all this, beneath the behavior, the culture, the energy, lies a deeper truthing. Our sexual nature is not just about pleasure or power. It's about connection. To be sexual is to be vulnerable, to move toward another in the hope of being met, seen, accepted. This desire to unite, physically, emotionally, spiritually, is not weakness. It is the foundation of meaning. Jung often spoke of individuation as the process of becoming whole, and one of the most profound ways we encounter our wholeness is through relationship. Not relationship as fantasy or projection, but as a mirror. In the erotic space, we are stripped of persona. We face our fears, our wounds, our hunger to be loved not for what we perform, but for what we truly are. And in that moment, sex becomes something more than instinct. It becomes revelation. This is why intimacy terrifies and heals in equal measure. It calls forth our shadows and our light. It exposes the places we hide, and also the places where we long to be free. And when we meet another not with control or pretense, but with presence, we begin to understand that love, true love, is not possession. It's recognition. It's the soul remembering itself in the eyes of another. To integrate sexuality is to reclaim this truth, that we are not meant to fragment ourselves into roles and rituals of performance. We are meant to relate, to touch, to feel, to know and be known at a depth that words can't fully capture. So remember this: sex, in its highest form, isn't about taking. It's about revealing. And if you let it, it will lead you not only to another, but to the parts of yourself you've been waiting your whole life to finally meet.